She shot her own father in the Wild West. For the years he kept her locked in the cellar. Deep shadows danced on the walls, mimicking the bizarre curves of old, half-rotten beams. The single ray of light, piercing through a narrow gap under the ceiling, only amplified the oppressive atmosphere of the cellar where Adelia had spent the last 10 years of her life. She was only 7 when her father, Elias Thorne, locked her in there. She barely remembered her mother, only fragments of gentle songs and whispers coming from behind the massive wooden door. But the memories of her mother were like a dream, a mirage that faded with each passing year. Adelia was now 17. The girl in the picture below is Adelia. Her eyes, once alive and curious, were now full of a deep, inexpressible sadness. The color of her hair, once bright chestnut, had dulled, blending with the general gloom. Her hands, thin and pale, were covered with calluses from countless attempts to escape from touching the cold, rough stone walls that had become her only companions. Her clothes, an old, worn-out burlap sack that Elias would throw to her every few years when the old one tore, barely covered her emaciated body, revealing only the paleness of her skin and the sharp angles of her bones. Her father, that's what she called him, though the word evoked only disgust and fear, didn't come often. Usually once a week, sometimes less, he would descend the creaking steps, his heavy footsteps echoing in the silence, and in his hand, he held a dim kerosene lamp, whose light cut into the gloom like a knife. His face, if she dared to look at it, was stern, covered with a tough gray stubble, and his eyes, deep-set and cold, never expressed anything but detachment. He would throw a crust of stale bread and a glass of water on the floor for her, sometimes a piece of dried meat, and always the same thing. Be quiet, don't ask questions, and don't try to get out. His voice was low, monotonous, devoid of any emotion, as if he were talking to a stone, not his own daughter. Adelia learned not to answer. Any word, any question only intensified his cold fury. She learned to be invisible, silent, like a shadow, so as not to provoke him. Adelia's only entertainment was watching a small colony of ants that had made their trails across the uneven stones of the floor. She would spend hours watching their bustling life, how they carried crumbs, built their miniature cities, and fought with each other. It was her only living world, her only window to reality. The ants were free, they could crawl anywhere, while she was chained to this damp ground. Sometimes, when it was unbearable, she would draw on the walls with charcoal that broke off from the burnt-out logs her father had forgotten. They were simple, childlike drawings: a sun, flowers, birds, a house she had never seen, a family she had never had. These drawings were her silent scream, her last refuge from the madness that was slowly approaching. One day, when Elias came down to the cellar, he was unusually agitated. His steps were heavier than usual, and his face was distorted by some inner struggle. He threw her the food, but then, instead of leaving immediately, he stopped. Adelia felt a chill run through her body. He never lingered. "I need your help," he rasped, his voice uncharacteristically low. It was the first full sentence he had spoken to her in 10 years, the first sentence that wasn't an order. Adelia looked up at him, her eyes full of cautious curiosity. He held an old, tattered leather bag in his hand. It smelled of earth and metal. He threw it on the floor, and the bag landed with a dull thud next to her. "I found this," he said. There's something in there, valuable. I need you to sort it out, separate it, and hide it." Adelia looked at the bag. Something was shifting inside, making a light clinking sound. She carefully untied it. Inside, among clumps of earth, lay ancient coins, glinting in the light. Gold, silver, copper, emeralds, rubies, sapphires. They shimmered and sparkled like hundreds of tiny stars that had fallen to the earth. Adelia had never seen such wealth. Her eyes widened in surprise. Elias watched her, his face inscrutable. "I know you're smart," he said. "Your mother, she was the same. She knew how to count, and she knew how to keep secrets." There was a note in his voice that Adelia couldn't understand. Something like a memory, like pain, like regret. But it was only for a moment. Then his face became stony again. "Divide it into 3 parts," he ordered. "Keep one for yourself. Hide the other one here. The third one. I'll take the third one." He pointed to a far corner of the cellar, where there was a small niche in the wall, hidden behind a pile of old barrels. Adelia nodded. She understood that it was not a request, but an order, and she felt that it was something important, something that could change her life, or at least give her a new task. She carefully began to sort through the treasures, her thin fingers feeling the smooth surfaces of the coins, the sharp edges of the stones. It was like a game, as if she had touched another world. Elias left, leaving her alone in the light of the kerosene lamp. The cellar plunged back into gloom, with only the glimmer of the jewels disturbing it. Adelia worked until late at night, her heart pounding with a new, unfamiliar excitement. She didn't know what this treasure was, where it came from, but she felt it was something more than just coins and stones. It was her first, albeit forced, connection to the outside world. Her first, albeit unspoken, mission. The next morning, when Elias came down again, Adelia was already waiting for him. 3 piles of treasure lay on the floor, neatly separated. He came up to her, his gaze sweeping over them, then over her face. "Good," he said, "you've worked well." He took one pile, the largest one, and hid it in his bag. Then he pointed to the other pile. "This is yours. Keep it." Adelia looked at her share. It was a lot, much more than she could have imagined. She didn't know what to do with such wealth. It was useless to her in this dungeon. "And this," she pointed to the 3rd pile. "This is for me," Elias replied, "but it will be kept here, in the hiding place." He went to the niche in the wall, moved a few barrels, and opened a small door hidden in the stone. Inside was a small shelf where he hid the treasures, and then he closed the door again and put the barrels back in place. He was strong, and his movements were precise. "No one should know about this." His voice was quiet and cold. "No one. Even if they torture you, you must not speak. It is very important." Adelia nodded. She felt he was talking about something very serious, something that could cost her life. But in her heart, despite the fear, something new was growing. A sense of importance, a feeling that she was now part of something big and dangerous. Elias left, and Adelia was once again alone. But now she was not just a prisoner. She was the keeper of a secret, and the owner of a fortune that, she felt, would still play a role in her life. She hid her share of the treasures under a pile of old rags in the corner of her room. Her life did not change externally, but something had shifted within her. Now she had a purpose, and, perhaps, hope. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Adelia's life in the cellar was transformed. Now she was not just a prisoner, but a keeper of a secret, the owner of a treasure. The gold and silver coins, the precious stones, hidden under old rags, became her only source of warmth in this cold, damp world. Every day, when Elias didn't come down, she would take them out, sort through them, feel their smooth surfaces, their sharp edges. For her, they were not just a fortune, but a bridge to another world, a world she had never seen, but of which she had dreamed. In her share of the treasure, besides the coins and stones, she found a small, time-darkened metal amulet. It was made in the shape of a bird with outstretched wings, with strange symbols engraved on it. Adelia had never seen anything like it. She would spend hours examining it, trying to unravel its mystery. The amulet seemed ancient, holding some unknown power. She felt its warmth in her hand, and that warmth soothed her, gave her a sense of security. It was something that belonged only to her. Meanwhile, Elias began to come down more often. His visits were now unpredictable. Sometimes he would appear twice a week, sometimes daily, and each time he was more tense than usual. His face was pale, his eyes feverishly gleamed, and his movements were sharp and nervous. He would throw the food on the floor, sometimes without even looking at her, and then immediately leave, as if something were chasing him. Adelia felt that something serious was happening beyond the cellar walls, something that worried even her stony father. One day, during one of his visits, Elias lingered. He stood by the door, his gaze fixed on the wall, as if he saw something there that she didn't. Adelia, watching him from the shadows, felt a chill run through her body. His lips trembled, and she heard him mumble something to himself. The words were indistinct, but they contained pain, anger, and despair. It was the first time she had seen him like this. "So, human, they're looking for me," he rasped, his voice almost a whisper. "They know I have it. They won't leave me alone." Adelia flinched. "They'd? Who were these they? And what did he have? The treasures? Or something else?" She wanted to ask, but she had been taught to be silent. Any word could provoke his fury. Elias turned to her sharply, his eyes full of a wild, insane gleam. "You must remember," he hissed. "To no one. Not a word. If they find you, they will torture you. They will force you to speak. But you must not. Remember your mother, She was strong. He didn't finish. His voice broke. He turned away again, pressing his forehead against the cold wall, and Adelia heard his shoulders tremble. He was crying. For the first time in her life, she saw tears on his face. It was a shock. A complete, all-encompassing shock that turned her world upside down. Her father, the stony, emotionless man, was crying. It was unthinkable. The shock of the scene was so strong that Adelia forgot her fear. She felt something new, something like compassion for this broken man who stood before her. She didn't understand what was happening. She didn't understand who was chasing him or why he was crying, but she saw his pain. And that pain was so strong that she felt it within herself. Elias, as if waking up, pulled away from the wall sharply. His face became stony again. The tears vanished as if they had never been there. But Adelia saw the red marks on his cheeks. He wiped them away with his hand. I have to go, he rasped, his voice dry and hoarse. I'll be back soon. Be careful. He hurried up the steps, and the creak of the door closing behind him seemed deafening. Adelia was left alone. The cellar seemed even colder and gloomier. Her father's words echoed in her head. They're looking for me. They know I have it. Remember your mother. She took out the bird-shaped amulet. Its warmth soothed her, but now there was also a sense of anxiety in that warmth. Her mother. What had happened to her? Why was her father talking about her now? And who were these they who were chasing him? She spent the next few days in a feverish contemplation. She recalled every one of her father's visits, every word, every gesture. She tried to find clues in them, to solve the mystery that now, it seemed to her, was connected not only to the treasures, but also to her own mother. A picture was slowly forming in her mind, but it was incomplete, fragmented, like the children's drawings on the wall. A few days later, Elias came down again. He was even more exhausted than last time. His clothes were torn, and his face was covered with scrapes. In his hand, he held a small bundle, which he threw to Adelia. "This is yours," he said, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Your mother's." Adelia carefully unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay an old, faded photograph. It showed a young woman, incredibly beautiful, with kind eyes and a gentle smile. Her hair was chestnut, just like Adelia's. It was her mother. Next to her stood a young Elias. His face was completely different. Young, happy, with a gentle smile that Adelia had never seen. In the photograph, they were hugging a little girl. It was Adelia, just a toddler. There was love shining in their eyes. It was a shock, a new wave of shock that washed over her. Her parents were happy. They loved each other, and they loved her. So what happened? Why did everything change? Under the photograph lay a letter, written in a thin, elegant script. It was old, yellowed, and some words were erased. Adelia, barely holding back the trembling in her hands, began to read. It was her mother's letter, addressed to her. "My dear Adelia, if you are reading this, it means I am no longer here. Your father, he changed. He went mad. He believes that this treasure will bring him immortality. He is obsessed with it. I tried to stop him, but he locked me in here. In this cellar. He thinks I want to take it from him, that I will betray him. He is afraid of losing it. He is insane, my dear. And I am afraid for you. He might do the same to you. He thinks you will become obsessed with it too. Elias, he is not the man I loved. He became a monster. If you ever find this letter, if you ever get out of here, run, my dear. Run and never look back, and keep this treasure a secret. It will not bring him immortality. It is cursed. I left you a key. It is hidden in one of the barrels, behind the secret compartment I always used for my needlework. It can open the way out. It can save you. Forgive me, my dear. Forgive me for not being able to protect you, but I will always love you. Your mom, Elizabeth Thorne." Adelia lowered the letter, her hands trembling. Shock, a deep, all-consuming shock. Her mother had been locked up here, in this cellar, and her father, he had killed her. He was a murderer. He was a madman, and she had spent 10 years in the same prison where her mother had died. In her heart, despite all the pain she had experienced, something new was growing. Anger, cold, scorching anger that burned her from within. Anger at her father, at his cruelty, at his madness, and a resolve to get out of there, and to take revenge. For her mother, for herself, for 10 years of a lost life. She looked at the amulet. A bird. A bird with outstretched wings. She remembered her mother's words. It is cursed. And the key that can open the way out. It is hidden in a barrel. In one of the barrels, behind the secret compartment. It was a chance for freedom. A chance for a new life, and a chance for retribution. The last of the kerosene in Elias's lamp was burning out, casting flickering shadows on the walls that seemed alive, dancing, full of unspoken secrets. Adelia sat with her back pressed against the cold stone, clutching her mother's yellowed letter and the old photograph. Each word from Elizabeth Thorne echoed with a new wave of pain and rage, burning her from within. Her father, her only parent, turned out to be a monster. A murderer who had held her captive for an entire decade, in the same damp grave where her mother had perished. It was a blow of such force that Adelia's world, already fragile, finally crumbled. But through the ruins of her old life, a sprout of a new, terrifying resolve was breaking through. She looked at the bird-shaped amulet that still lay in her palm. Its surface, dull and battered by time, now seemed like a symbol of the freedom her mother had so desperately tried to pass on to her. The words "the key" hidden in one of the barrels, behind the secret compartment I always used for my needlework, burned in her mind like a lighthouse. The cellar was her home, her prison, and she knew every corner of it, every crack in the wall. But the needlework compartment, this was something Elias had never mentioned. This was a secret only between mother and daughter. Adelia got up. Her thin legs, accustomed to the confined space, trembled with strain, but a cold, calculating fire burned in her eyes. She approached the far wall, where Elias hid his share of the treasures. There were rows of old barrels, filled with something heavy and stale. The air here was especially damp, smelling of rotten wood and mold. Adelia began to cautiously move them away. Every rustle, every creak seemed deafening to her, and she constantly listened for footsteps on the stairs. If Elias returned and caught her, the consequences would be terrible, but fear no longer paralyzed her. Anger and resolve were stronger. The barrels were heavy, and her emaciated hands quickly grew tired. Several times she dropped them, and the thud echoed throughout the cellar. Adelia froze, listening, but no sounds came from above. This gave her confidence. She continued. Her body ached, and her muscles burned, but she didn't give up. Finally, behind the largest and heaviest barrel, she discovered a small, barely noticeable door, carved directly into the stone. It was almost invisible, masterfully camouflaged to look like the uneven surface of the wall. The hiding place Elias used for his treasures was right nearby, but this one, it seemed, was even more ancient, hidden, long forgotten. Her fingers ran over the cold stone. There was no handle or lock on the door, only a tiny, almost invisible crack. Adelia carefully pushed her fingernail into the crack and pulled. The door yielded, opening a small cavity. Inside, among dry herbs and some old, tattered fabrics, lay a small, skillfully carved wooden box. She pulled it out. It was light, and it smelled of something sweet, reminiscent of the scents she vaguely remembered from her early childhood. Her mother's scents. Adelia opened the box. Inside, at the bottom, lay a miniature embroidery needle, wrapped in thin threads of different colors, her mother's needlework supplies. Underneath it, in a velvet pouch, she found a key, a small, elegant one, made of tarnished silver, with intricate patterns engraved on its head. This was it, the key to her freedom. Her heart pounded like a caged bird. Now that she had the key, Adelia began to examine the cellar with a new purpose. She knew that the place had only one entrance, the massive wooden door that Elias always locked with a heavy bolt, but her mother had mentioned the way out, so there must be another way. She spent several hours feeling the walls, tapping the stones, trying to find a hidden door or a trapdoor. Her thin fingers explored every unevenness, every crack. She moved methodically, like a hunter tracking her prey, her intuition, sharpened by years of confinement, guiding her. Finally, in the furthest corner, under a pile of old sacks, she came across something unusual. The stone was not like the others. It was smooth, polished, and between it and the neighboring stones, there was a thin, almost invisible crack. Adelia knelt down and put her ear to the stone. Inside, it seemed to her, there was air. Or was it just her imagination, craving freedom? She took out the key. It fit the crack perfectly. She inserted it and slowly turned. There was a quiet, barely audible click. The stone she had mistaken for part of the wall was actually part of a small, hidden door that led. Where? Adelia didn't know, but her heart was filled with a frantic hope. She pushed the door. It opened with a barely audible creak, revealing a narrow, dark passage. Fresh air wafted out, smelling of earth and grass, which for Adelia was the most beautiful scent in the world. She took a deep breath of it, her lungs, accustomed to the stale cellar air, greedily absorbing this new life. Before stepping into the unknown, Adelia returned to her share of the treasures. She took a few gold coins, a few precious stones, wrapped them in a piece of old cloth, and hid them in her waistband. She put the burnt amulet around her neck. This was all she had. Everything that connected her to the past and gave her hope for the future. She cast a farewell glance at the cellar, at her children's drawings on the walls, at the colony of ants scurrying across the floor. 10 years. 10 years of hell. And now, she was free. Taking a deep breath, Adelia stepped into the passage. It was narrow and dark, and she had to crawl on all fours. The stone scratched her hands and knees, but she didn't feel the pain. She crawled forward, toward the light that was visible in the distance. The passage turned out to be quite long, and it took her several minutes to reach its end. Finally, she saw the light. Bright, blinding, it cut into her eyes, making them water. Adelia closed her eyes, and then slowly opened them. A new world opened up before her. A world she had only seen in her drawings. She found herself in a small crevice, hidden from prying eyes by thick thickets of shrubs and tall grasses. Above her, a boundless blue sky stretched out, with fluffy clouds floating across it. The sun, bright and warm, gently caressed her face. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of wild flowers and heated earth. Sounds reached her ears, the singing of birds, the rustle of leaves, the distant sound of the wind. It was overwhelming. Her senses, atrophied from years in the dungeon, now perceived everything with incredible sharpness. Every color, every sound, every smell was a revelation to her. The world was much bigger, brighter, and more alive than she could have imagined. She stood up, her body, accustomed to a crouched position, straightening with difficulty. The sunlight burned her pale skin, but she didn't pay attention. She stood in the middle of this new world, her heart filled with a mixture of awe and terror, pounding in her chest. Terror, the realization that she was alone, completely alone in this huge, unfamiliar world full of dangers. She had nothing but a few coins and an amulet, and she had no one. She spent a few minutes just standing and absorbing everything around her. Then, when the initial stupor passed, her gaze fell on something familiar, something that caused a new surge of anxiety in her. In the distance, among the trees, the outlines of a ranch were visible. Elias's ranch, her prison. She realized that she was not far from home, that her freedom was only apparent, that she was still in danger. She could be discovered at any moment. Adelia pressed herself to the ground, hiding behind the bushes. Her mother had said that Elias was being pursued by some they, so she had to be doubly careful. She had no weapon, no food, no plan, only resolve and the amulet. She had to move. Where? She didn't know. But staying here was too dangerous. She began to cautiously make her way through the bushes, keeping away from open spaces. Her eyes carefully scanned the surroundings, looking for signs of danger. Her body, though weak, was surprisingly agile. The years spent in a confined space had taught her to move silently, like a shadow. She moved toward the forest that was visible in the distance. The forest could give her cover. After a while, she came out onto a small, overgrown path. Carriages once traveled along it, but now it was almost unrecognizable. Adelia walked along it, hoping that it would lead her somewhere. She didn't know where she was going, but every step forward was a step toward her new life, toward her revenge. And although fear did not let go of her, a new fire burned in her soul. The fire of freedom, the fire of hope, and the fire of retribution. The forest greeted Adelia with a deep, cool silence, full of the scents of damp earth, pine needles, and unsolved mysteries. Tall, ancient pines reached for the sky, forming a living canopy through which only rare rays of sun broke through to the ground. Every branch, every rustle of leaves seemed to be part of a huge, living organism. Adelia felt tiny and vulnerable in this silent grandeur, but at the same time, the forest gave her a sense of freedom that she had been deprived of for so long. Her thin fingers touched the moss on the tree trunks, felt the bark, absorbing every new texture. Her eyes, accustomed to the gloom of the cellar, now greedily absorbed every shade of green, every glimmer of light. She walked along a barely visible path that wound between the trees, bypassing roots and stones. Her legs, weak from long confinement, quickly grew tired, but she didn't stop. The fear of being discovered drove her forward, and the thirst for freedom and revenge gave her strength. In her pocket, clutched in a piece of cloth, the gold coins clinked, her only possession. The bird amulet around her neck was the only reminder of her mother, her last gift. After several hours, Adelia, exhausted and hungry, came across a small clearing. In the center of the clearing, surrounded by dense bushes of wild blackberries, lay an old, half-rotten well. A broken wooden winch stuck out above it. Water. This was a lifesaver. Adelia ran up to it, her body trembling with fatigue. She lowered her head into the dark mouth, hoping to see water. Fortunately, there was water, its cold shimmer visible in the depths. She tried to reach it with her hands, but the well was too deep. Her thin fingers barely touched the surface. Despair seized her. She was so close to salvation, yet so far. She looked around, trying to find something that could serve as a bucket or a rope. Nothing. Only trees, bushes, and stones. Hunger and thirst began to take their toll. Her head was spinning, and colored spots swam before her eyes. She leaned against the cold stone of the well, her body slowly sliding to the ground. It was a moment of almost complete desperation. Suddenly, she heard a rustle, soft, almost silent. It came from the bushes that grew at the edge of the clearing. Adelia instantly tensed, her heart pounding. She tried to hide, but it was too late. A man emerged from the thicket. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with a face scorched by the sun and wind. His hair, dark and slightly disheveled, was covered by an old, tattered cowboy hat. He wore a worn leather vest, under which a faded blue shirt was visible. A heavy revolver in a holster hung from his belt, and next to it, a hunting knife. The gaze of his brown eyes was sharp and perceptive, but at the same time, there was a kind of fatigue, a deep sadness in it. This was a man who had seen much and survived much. His face, though stern, did not inspire fear, but rather a cautious respect. In his movements, slow and confident, a hidden strength was felt. He looked like a wandering hunter or prospector who had stumbled upon this place by chance. He saw Adelia. The man stopped. His gaze swept over her emaciated body, over her pale skin, over her dusty clothes. Then it stopped at her face. Adelia felt her cheeks flush. She tried to hide her emaciated hands, her ragged appearance, but it was too late. She felt so pathetic, so helpless. "What are you doing here, child?" The man's voice was low and slightly hoarse, but there was no threat or mockery in it, just cautious curiosity. He spoke calmly, slowly, as if he didn't want to scare her. Adelia didn't answer. She had been taught to be silent. Any word could be fatal. She just stared at him, her eyes, full of caution, never leaving his face. The man slowly, as if not wanting to make any sudden movements, came closer. He stopped a few steps away from her. His gaze was still perceptive, examining. "Are you hungry? And thirsty?" He nodded at the well. "I see. I have some water and food, if you want." Adelia slowly nodded. Her throat was too dry to speak. The man took a flask of water and a piece of dried meat from his travel bag. He held them out to her. Adelia cautiously took the food, her hands trembling. She drank the water in small sips, then slowly bit off a piece of the meat. The taste of the food, so simple and ordinary, seemed to her to be the most exquisite dish in the world. The man sat down opposite her, his gaze still fixed on her face. He didn't ask questions, he didn't rush her. He just waited. His patience was astonishing. When Adelia had recovered a little, she was finally able to speak. Her voice was hoarse and weak, but she spoke. "Thank you." The man nodded. "What's your name?" "Adelia. I'm John. John Hawk." He smiled. His smile was slight, barely noticeable, but there was no hint of falseness in it. "Where are you from?" "Adelia. I haven't seen you here before." Adelia hesitated. She couldn't tell him the truth. She couldn't tell him that she had escaped from a cellar where her own father had held her. He might think she was crazy, or he might turn her into Elias. She had to be careful. I'm lost," she said, her voice quiet. "I was walking from another town. My parents, they die. And I'm alone." John Hawk listened to her carefully, his gaze thoughtful. He saw that she was lying, but he didn't interrupt her. He just nodded. "I see." They sat like that for a while, in silence. John Hawk watched her, his gaze full of compassion. He saw the pain in her eyes. He saw the fear. He saw the loneliness. He knew she had been through something terrible. He himself had been through a lot. "You can come with me, Adelia," he finally said. "I'm heading to Fort Wells. There's a small town there. You can find a job there and start a new life." Adelia looked at him, her eyes full of disbelief. He was offering her help, just like that, for no reason. It was too good to be true. In her world, people didn't offer help just like that. There was always some kind of game. "Why'd?" she asked, her voice quiet. John Hawk shrugged. "Because I think so, child. Everyone deserves a chance. And you look like you need a chance." He smiled again. This time his smile was more open, warmer. She felt she could trust him. She nodded. "Okay, I'll go with you, John Hawk." John Hawk stood up. "Then let's go. Fort Wells is a few days' journey away. We need to hurry." They walked along the path that led deeper into the forest. Adelia walked behind John Hawk, her heart filled with a new hope pounding in her chest. She didn't know what awaited her, but she felt that this was the beginning of something new, the beginning of her new life. A life without a Cellar, without Elias, and without fear. She didn't know that this stern but kind man hid his own secret, his own pain. A secret that would still play a role in her fate. Adelia and John Hawk's journey through the wild, untouched expanses of the West was not just a road to Fort Wells, but a gradual unfolding of a new world for Adelia and a slow but sure healing for John. Forests were replaced by sun-scorched prairies. Deep canyons gave way to majestic mountains whose peaks were lost in the clouds. Each day brought new challenges and new revelations. The days were filled with an unfamiliar fatigue for Adelia, but also with a sense of freedom she had never known. John Hawk proved to be a reliable and silent companion. His figure, tall and broad-shouldered, always walked ahead, paving the way. He was an experienced tracker who knew every stone, every tree. He taught Adelia to read animal tracks, to distinguish edible plants from poisonous ones, to build a fire without smoke. His lessons were short but concise, and Adelia, with her keen mind and perceptiveness, quickly grasped everything. He didn't ask unnecessary questions about her past, only occasionally casting thoughtful glances at her, full of unspoken compassion. He felt her pain, her loneliness, and that made him more attentive to her. His eyes, deep brown, radiated inner peace, although at times a shadow of a long-past tragedy, which he concealed as carefully as Adelia did, flashed in them. Adelia, in turn, opened up to John. At first, their conversations were sparse, limited only to their basic needs. But gradually, sitting by the evening fire under the huge, starry sky, she began to talk. She told him about the cellar, about her imprisonment, about the silent years of loneliness. She didn't mention her father, calling him the one who locked me up. The pain of these memories was still fresh, but talking about it, sharing it with someone who listened without judgment, was healing for her. John listened to her attentively. His face was impassive, but his eyes showed deep compassion. He didn't interrupt, he didn't give advice, he just listened. And that was enough. He understood that her story was a story of survival, a story of a strength of spirit that could have broken any other person, but not her. Sometimes Adelia would take out her bird amulet. She would spend hours examining it, trying to unravel its mystery. John was also interested in it. "It's a beautiful amulet," he once said, his voice quiet. "What is it?" "My mother. She gave it to me." Adelia stroked the dull surface of the amulet. "I think it's something important, but I don't know what." John Hawk took the amulet, examined it carefully. "This is an ancient symbol. It was worn by the shamans of one of the tribes. The Indians believed that it gives its owner wisdom and protection, and also the ability to see what is hidden from the eyes of others." He returned the amulet to Adelia. "Perhaps it will help you find your way." His words were mysterious, but there was a deep truth in them that soothed Adelia. After a few days of travel, they finally reached Fort Wells. It was a small but bustling town, located on the bank of a river. It was bigger than any other settlement Adelia had seen so far, and it seemed like a bastion of civilization in the middle of the wilderness. The streets were full of people, wagons drove by, sounds of music and laughter came from the saloons. This was the world that Adelia had only known from her mother's stories and her own drawings, and now she was a part of it. John Hawk led her to a small but clean boarding house, which was owned by an elderly, good-natured woman named Martha. She was tall, with gray hair tied in a tight bun, and kind, perceptive eyes. Her face was lined with wrinkles, but they showed warmth and wisdom. She was a widow who had lost her husband long ago and ran the boarding house alone. She immediately felt compassion for Adelia when she saw her pale face and emaciated body. "This is Adelia," John Hawk said to Martha. "She needs a job and shelter. She got lost." He didn't go into details, knowing that Martha would understand everything herself. Martha looked at Adelia, her gaze full of sympathy. "Of course, child. I always have work for a hardworking girl, and a room. A small one, though." She smiled. Her smile was warm and sincere, and Adelia felt a pleasant warmth run through her body. For the first time in many years, she felt welcome. Adelia began to work at the boarding house. She cleaned the rooms, helped in the kitchen, and washed the laundry. The work was hard, but she didn't complain. Every new task was a step toward a new life, toward independence. She learned quickly. Her hands, accustomed to hard work in the cellar, now easily handled any duty. Martha was pleased with her. She saw that Adelia was not just a hardworking girl, but also smart, kind, and pure of heart. She began to treat her like her own daughter. Meanwhile, John Hawk disappeared. He didn't stay in Fort Wells, but left, as always, for the unknown. Adelia felt his absence. She missed his silent presence, his calm words, his deep compassion. But she understood that he was not the kind of person who could stay in one place for long. He was a nomad, a lone wolf who wandered the prairies, looking for his way. He was her savior, her guide to a new world, and she would always be grateful to him. In Fort Wells, with Martha's permission, Adelia began to sell her jewels. The gold coins, emeralds, rubies, all of it was just trinkets to her, but for the townspeople, they were a real treasure. She didn't decide to do this right away. The guilt of using something that was connected to her father's madness and her mother's death burned her. She remembered her mother's words, It is cursed." But Martha convinced her that money was a tool, not evil, that with money, she could help herself, could start a new life. Adelia sold the jewels cautiously, one by one, so as not to attract too much attention. She spent the money she earned on food, clothes, books. She bought books about the world she had never seen, about science, about history. She learned, she read, absorbing knowledge like a sponge. She wanted to make up for lost time. She wanted to become smart, educated, to be worthy of her mother. One day, as Adelia was walking through the market, her gaze fell on an old, battered chest. It was made of dark wood, with metal plates and a complex lock. It was the same chest that Elias had used for his treasures, which he had hidden in the secret compartment. Her heart pounded. She recognized it. She was sure. But how did it get here? And who was selling it? Next to the chest stood an elderly, skinny man with cunning eyes and a long, hooked nose. He was dressed in dirty clothes, and his hands were covered with calluses. He was a junk dealer, known in the town for his greed. "What are you selling, sir?" Adelia asked, her voice quiet, but there was a note in it that she couldn't hide. The man looked at her, his eyes narrowed. "An old chest, child. Found it in an abandoned ranch, in the woods. Nothing special, just old junk." He bared his teeth. "If you want to buy it, the price is not high." Adelia felt a shiver run through her body. An abandoned ranch, in the woods. It was Elias's ranch, so he had left, or he was no longer alive. Her father, the man who was her jailer and her mother's murderer. It was a shock. A new, all-consuming shock. He was gone. He had disappeared. And she was free. Truly free. She bought the chest. Her hands trembled as she carried it back to the boarding house. She felt that a new secret was hidden inside it. A secret that could change everything. Martha, seeing the chest, raised her eyebrows in surprise. "What do you have there, child?" she asked. "An old chest," Adelia replied, her voice barely audible. "I bought it." She carried the chest up to her room. Her hands trembled as she tried to open it. The lock was complex, and she didn't have the key. She spent several hours trying to break it, but nothing worked. Finally, she remembered her amulet, the bird. John Hawk said that it gave the ability to see what was hidden. Adelia took the amulet, pressed it to her palm. Her eyes closed. She focused, trying to feel what was hidden in the chest. In her mind, images slowly began to form. Numbers, letters, symbols. It was like a puzzle she had to solve. She opened her eyes. The amulet in her hand flickered brightly. She understood. It was not a regular lock. It was a combination lock, a code that she had to decipher. She took a piece of charcoal and began to draw the symbols she had seen in her mind on the floor of the room. Numbers, letters, strange patterns. She recalled every drawing on the cellar walls, every pattern on her children's toes, every symbol she had seen in her dreams. She spent several hours solving the puzzle. Finally, she found the solution, a numerical code. Adelia entered the code into the lock. A quiet click was heard. The lid of the chest slowly lifted. Inside, among old papers and dust, lay a small, battered leather journal, and something else, several gold bars, and a map. A map on which some places were marked. And, most importantly, a photograph of her father, Elias Thorne, but not the one from the letter. This was a more recent photograph. On it, he was younger than the one she remembered, but his eyes were full of the same cold, detached cruelty. And next to him stood a woman, not her mother. Another woman, beautiful, with black hair and piercing eyes. And she was holding a baby, a bow. It was a shock, a new, stunning shock that made Adelia freeze. Her father, he had another family, another woman, and another child. She had a brother, or a half-brother. The pain of this discovery was sharp, but it didn't have her usual sadness. There was guilt. Guilt for not knowing this sooner. Guilt for her mother suffering because of his betrayal. And anger. Anger at her father, at his lies, at his double life. She grabbed the journal. She had to know the truth, the whole truth. Adelia's hands trembled, barely holding the tattered leather journal. The soft light of the kerosene lamp, left by Martha on the knitstand, barely dispelled the gloom of her small room in the boarding house. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle outside the window seemed part of an unfolding mystery, a harbinger of the inevitable. The photograph of Elias, his new woman, and the baby lay beside it, its images seared into Adelia's mind, distorting everything she had ever known about her family. The pain was sharp, but now it was mixed with guilt for her mother, whose life was ruined by lies, and intrigue. Who was this child? Her half-brother. Adelia opened the journal. Elias's first entries were made long before her birth, even before he met Elizabeth. In them, he appeared as a young, ambitious prospector, obsessed with legends of the cursed gold of the wasteland, an ancient Native American treasure that, according to belief, granted untold riches, but in return demanded sacrifices and stole sanity. Elias described his insane search, his hardships, his unwavering belief in this legend. Even then, an unhealthy obsession, a thirst for greatness, which distinguished him from ordinary people, slipped into his words. He dreamed of becoming a king, the owner of untold treasures that would make him invulnerable. In every line, his growing egocentrism was evident, his readiness to walk over others to achieve his goal. He didn't mention morality or conscience, only gold, power, and the immortality he believed it would bring him. Adelia read, and a picture slowly formed in her mind. Her father, even before her birth, was broken by this insane idea. It was not a sudden breakdown, but a slow, methodical descent into darkness, into which the whisper of gold was pulling him. He found it. The cursed gold of the wasteland. It was in the very chest she was now holding. And this discovery was a new shock for Adelia. The gold bars she had found were not just a fortune, but part of an ancient, sinister mystery. The entries continued, describing in detail how Elias stumbled upon a forgotten Native American cave, hidden deep in the desert. The cave was full of gold nuggets, ancient artifacts, and sinister symbols carved on the walls. He described how, gripped by fever, he began to carry out the treasures, ignoring the warnings carved in the stone, the ominous omens. He believed that the curse would not affect him, that he was stronger than any ancient forces. He was blind. The obsession consumed his mind. After he had collected some of the treasures, the journal began to describe his meeting with Elizabeth, Adelia's mother. Elias described her as a bright ray of light in his dark world, as the only woman who could see something good in him. He wrote about his love for her, about his hopes for a family, about how she tried to dissuade him from the insane idea of the cursed gold. But his obsession was stronger. He believed that the gold would bring them happiness, protection, eternal life. He convinced her that it was their chance for a new life. Adelia read these lines, and her heart ached with pain for her mother, who, despite everything, loved this broken man. Then the tone of the journal changed abruptly. Elias began to describe how paranoia was gripping him. He began to see enemies everywhere, to believe that everyone wanted to take his treasure. He described how he began to hide the gold in different places, how he became less and less trusting of Elizabeth, suspecting her of conspiring with invisible enemies. He began to lock the cellar where most of his gold was stored, and he himself went down there less and less often. His entries became more fragmented, more insane, full of hallucinations and fear. He began to believe that Elizabeth herself wanted to steal his treasure, that she would betray him. This was his forbidden choice. He chose madness and gold, betraying love and trust. Then came a horrifying entry, describing the day he locked Elizabeth in the cellar. He wrote about it without regret, without a hint of doubt, as if it was the only right decision. He believed he was saving her from those who hunt for the gold, when in reality he was just succumbing to his madness. He believed she wanted to betray him. He took away her freedom, and then her life, for the sake of his sick imagination. Adelia read these lines, and she was gripped by a deep guilt. Guilt for her mother suffering so much, guilt for not being able to save her, guilt for her own existence being stained by this terrible act of betrayal. She felt as trapped as her mother, but not in a cellar, but in a web of lies and madness. Further in the journal, Elias described his life after he imprisoned Elizabeth. He tried to convince himself that he had done the right thing, but his entries became darker and darker. Then he met another woman, Bethany. In the photograph next to the journal, which lay nearby, she was beautiful, with lush black hair, bright eyes, and a strong chin, but a deep sadness was evident in her gaze. Elias described Bethany as a lost soul whom he saved from loneliness. He didn't mention love, only his desire to control, his need for company that wouldn't encroach on his treasure. He was cruel to her, just as he had been to Elizabeth, but Bethany, it seemed, was broken much earlier. She didn't resist his madness. She was too tired, too lonely. She bore him a son, Silas. The entries about Silas were contradictory. On the one hand, Elias felt a strange attachment to him, seeing in him a continuation of himself, his heir. On the other hand, he was afraid that Silas would also be obsessed with gold, and so he began to treat him with the same paranoia as he did others. He locked him up, punished him for the slightest disobedience, deprived him of communication. He made him a prisoner, just as Adelia had been, and as her mother had been. A few years after Silas's birth, Bethany died. In the journal, Elias wrote about her death dryly, without emotion, only noting that she was weak and couldn't endure. Adelia felt deep compassion for this unhappy woman who had been trapped by a madman. Her death was an act of cruelty, just like the death of her own mother. After Bethany's death, Elias completely sank into his madness. He became a hermit. His ranch turned into an abandoned place. He finally lost touch with reality. He saw enemies everywhere, talked to invisible interlocutors, lived in his own world of fear and paranoia. He became completely obsessed with preserving his gold, convinced that it was the only way to avoid death. The last entries in the journal were almost unreadable, written in an uneven handwriting, full of fragmented words and insane drones. They told of his last days, of how he tried to hide the rest of the gold, of how he became more and more afraid of them, those who, in his opinion, were chasing him. The journal ended in mid-sentence, on the phrase, "They're close. They know. He too." The last word was erased, but Adelia guessed he was Silas. Elias was afraid that his own son would betray him, would take the gold. This was his last, insane thought. Adelia closed the journal. Her body was shaking from exhaustion and emotional shock. All these years she had lived in captivity of lies, in the darkness of ignorance. Now that the truth was revealed, she felt as if her skin had been peeled off. Every nerve was exposed, every pain came to life. But with this also came liberation. Liberation from the burden of the unknown, from guilt, from the feeling of her own insignificance. Her father was a monster, but now she knew why. And she knew that she was not alone. She had a brother. Her gaze fell on the map she had found in the chest. Several points were marked on it, and one of them was circled in red. It was an old abandoned mine in the mountains, not far from Fort Wells. Next to this place, the name Silas was written in pencil. Her brother. He was alive, and, perhaps, he was there, in that mine, as trapped as she had been, as much a victim of Elias's madness. Now her goal was clear. She had to find Silas, and save him from a fate she had miraculously escaped. The amulet on her neck flickered faintly. Its warmth gave her strength, the strength to move on, the strength to fight. She stood up. Her eyes, full of new resolve, looked at the map. The path was dangerous, but she was ready. Ready for a new battle, for a new life, for a new meaning. The sunrise in the mountains, not far from Fort Wells, was permeated with a piercing cold and a deceptive silence. The sun had not yet appeared from behind the sharp peaks, but the sky was already beginning to lighten, coloring itself in soft shades of gray and pale pink. Adelia, wrapped in her thin cloak, clutched the map she had found in Nelia's chest. On it, circled in red, was an abandoned mine, and next to it was the name, Silas, her half-brother. He was the goal. He was the key to her liberation from the past and the beginning of a new life. She walked alone, her steps light and silent, like a wildcat. John Hawke, her savior and mentor, had stayed in Fort Wells. He understood her resolve, her need to take this step alone. He just nodded silently when she told him she had to go alone. There was anxiety in his eyes, but he knew it was impossible to stop her. His faith in her, his silent support, gave her strength. The bird amulet hung around Adelia's neck. Its metal was cold and hard, but she felt its warmth. It was a symbol of her connection to her mother, her protection, her intuition. The mine was a few hours' walk from Fort Wells, deep in a narrow, rocky gorge. The road to it was dangerous, strewn with sharp stones and cliffs. Adelia cautiously made her way forward, her eyes carefully scanning the surroundings, looking for signs of danger. She knew that Elias, even if he was not alive, could have left traps or his henchmen here. She was ready for anything. Finally, she saw it. The abandoned mine. It was a grim, desolate place, surrounded by piles of weathered stones and rusty fragments of old equipment. The entrance to the shaft, a gaping black hole, looked like the maw of a giant beast. The air here was heavy, saturated with the smell of dust, dampness, and something subtly ominous. Adelia stopped, listening. The silence was unnatural, almost absolute. Not a single sound, not a rustle, not the singing of birds. Only the distant whistle of the wind wandering over the mountain peaks. It was too suspicious. She took out the small knife that John Hawke had given her from her waistband. Its steel was cold and hard in her hand. She slowly moved toward the entrance of the shaft. Her heart pounded, but there was no fear in her eyes, only cold resolve. She was ready to face her past, ready for any danger. Inside the shaft, there was complete darkness. The air was heavy, stuffy, smelling of rotten wood and metal. Adelia cautiously moved forward, her hands sliding along the cold, damp wall. She tried to make out anything, but the darkness was so thick that she could barely see her own hands. She felt goosebumps run through her body. It was a creepy place. Suddenly, she heard a sound, a quiet, barely audible moan. It came from somewhere deep within the shaft. Adelia instantly tensed. It was Silas. He was here. And he was alive. She moved forward, toward the source of the sound, her steps quick and silent. The deeper she went into the shaft, the stronger the smell became. The smell of dust, sweat, and blood. Her heart ached with anxiety. Finally, she saw him. In a small side tunnel, chained to the wall with a thick chain, sat a young man. His body was emaciated, his clothes torn, and his hair, black and dirty, fell over his face, hiding it. There were scrapes and bruises on his hands and feet. He was unconscious, his head resting on his chest. It was Silas, her half-brother, the man in the photograph, next to Bethany, just as handsome, with the same strong chin. Adelia rushed to him, her heart aching with compassion. Silas, Silas. She tried to wake him, but he didn't react. His body was cold, almost lifeless. She examined his wounds. They were deep, infected. He needed help. Urgently, she remembered her mother's letter, how her father had kept her there. Now she knew that Silas had also become a victim of his madness. He was locked up here, in this terrible place, deprived of light, food, and water, just so no one would find the cursed gold. Adelia tried to free him, but the chain was thick, and the lock was massive. She didn't have a key. She tried to break it with her knife, but the steel was too strong. Despair seized her. She was so close, yet so far from saving him. She looked around, trying to find something that could help. Her gaze fell on a pile of old tools lying in the corner of the tunnel. Shovels, pickaxes, hammers. She grabbed one of the hammers and, clenching her teeth, began to hit the chain. The metal rang, sparks flew, but the chain didn't give in. Her hands quickly grew tired, and her body ached. But she didn't give up. She hit again and again, her eyes burning with resolve. Finally, after several minutes of hard work, the chain gave in. The lock broke with a dull thud. Silas was free. Adelia threw the hammer and tried to lift him, but he was too heavy. "Silas, wake up. We have to go." She shook him by the shoulders, her voice full of desperation. Silas slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was blurry, but a spark of consciousness flashed in it. He looked at Adelia, his eyes full of incomprehension. "Who are you?" he rasped, his voice weak. "I'm Adelia, your sister," she replied, her voice full of tenderness. "We have to go." "Father, he did this." Silas tried to get up, but his strength left him. He fell to the ground again, his body trembling. "Father, he's crazy. He wanted to kill me." Adelia hugged him. "I know, but it's okay now. We're together. We're getting out of here." She helped him up. His body was heavy, and she had to support him. They slowly moved toward the entrance of the shaft. Every step was a trial for her, but she didn't give up. She felt that she had to save him from a fate she had miraculously escaped. As they left the mine, a new shock awaited them. The air was filled with the smell of smoke, and the sky over the mine was orange from the fire. The ranch, Elias's ranch, it was burning. Flames soared into the sky, devouring the old buildings. And in the light of this flame, against the backdrop of the burning ranch, stood a figure. Elias. He was alive, and he was looking at them. His face was distorted with madness, and in his hand he held a revolver. "You came for my gold," he roared, his voice full of rage. "I knew it. I knew you'd come. You all want to take it from me." Adelia froze. A shock. A deep, all-consuming shock. Her father was alive, and he was even crazier than ever. He stood before them, like a ghostly guardian of his cursed gold. Silas, seeing his father, trembled with fear. Elias raised the revolver. His gaze was fixed on Adelia. "You betrayed me. Just like your mother. You're all the same. You all want my gold." Adelia felt a chill come over her. He was going to shoot. At her. At Silas. At her brother. At her only family. Anger. A cold, scorching anger. It burned inside her. She remembered her mother's words. He's insane, my dear. And she understood. He wouldn't change. He would continue his madness until he destroyed everything around him. She looked at Silas. His face was pale, his eyes full of terror. He was weak. He wouldn't be able to defend himself. Adelia gripped her knife tighter. She had to do it. She had to stop him. For her mother. For Silas. For herself. "No!" she screamed, her voice full of resolve. "We won't let you kill anyone else." Elias fired. The bullet whizzed past her head, hitting a stone. Adelia lunged at him. Her movements were quick and precise. She didn't give him a second chance. Her knife glinted in the light of the flames. She plunged it into his chest. Deeply, Elias screamed, his eyes wide with surprise. He looked at Adelia. Something like realization flashed in his gaze. Then he fell to the ground, his body limped, dead. Adelia stood over him, her body trembling. In her hands was the bloody knife. Her father, the man who was her jailer and her mother's murderer, dead. She had killed him. Guilt. A heavy, crushing guilt fell on her like an avalanche, but with it also came liberation. Liberation from fear, from madness, from the past. She had done it. She had saved Silas. She had avenged her mother. Silas, weak and exhausted, looked at her, his eyes full of horror and admiration. He had seen what she had done. He had seen her strength. "Adelia," he whispered, his voice full of reverence. Adelia lowered the knife. Her eyes, full of tears, looked at him. "It's over, Silas. Now we're free." She hugged him, her body trembling. They stood in the middle of the burning ranch, embracing. To lonely children who had escaped their father's madness. Their past was destroyed, but their future was in their hands. Smoke from Elias's burning ranch rose to the pre-dawn sky, a black, ominous column, slowly dissolving into the gray haze. Adelia stood over her father's body, her hands still clutching the bloody knife, and her body trembling from what she had been through. Next to her, weak and exhausted, leaning on her, stood Silas. His eyes, full of horror, were fixed on the dead Elias, and then they shifted to Adelia, alternating between fear and reverence. The world around them seemed to have frozen, deafened by the silence after the shots and screams. It was a moment of deep, all-consuming shock for both of them. Adelia felt relief and a terrible, crushing guilt fighting within her. She had killed her father, the man who had been her jailer and her mother's murderer, but he was her father. This realization weighed heavily on her soul, creating a deep wound. We have to get out of here," Adelia whispered, her voice hoarse. The flames from the ranch were already beginning to creep toward the nearest buildings. They couldn't stay here. She carefully helped Silas move away from Elias's body. His legs barely held him, and he kept leaning on her. His black, tangled hair, similar to Elias's, fell over his pale face, emphasizing his exhaustion. The strong chin that Adelia had noticed in the photograph was now strained from what he had been through. She saw that Silas was a fragile copy of his father, but there was no madness in his eyes, only deep pain. They moved away from the burning ruins, finding a small shelter behind a pile of stones. Adelia took a flask of water from the bag that John Hawk had left for her and gave it to Silas. He drank greedily, his throat making dry sounds. Then she examined his wounds. They were deep and infected, with bloody marks from the chains on his thin wrists and ankles. "We need to get to Fort Wells," she said, her voice firm. "Martha is there. She help you." She broke off a piece of cloth from her cloak and carefully bandaged the deepest cuts, trying to stop the bleeding. Silas only moaned quietly, his body trembling. The road to Fort Wells took several agonizing hours. Adelia supported Silas, who could barely stand. Her own body ached from exhaustion, but she didn't give up. She felt her responsibility for him, for her brother, the only person she had left in this world. The sun was already high, scorching them with its merciless light when they finally reached the outskirts of the town. First, they headed to Martha's boarding house. The kind woman, seeing them, gasped. Her perceptive eyes instantly assessed the situation. Seeing Silas, exhausted and wounded, she rushed to them. Her hands, wrinkled but strong, carefully took Silas, helping Adelia. "My God, child," Martha exclaimed, her voice full of compassion. "What's wrong with him? Come in." Quickly, she led them to her room, where there was a soft sofa and a warm fireplace. Adelia carefully laid Silas on the sofa, and Martha immediately began to examine his wounds. She was an experienced woman who knew her way around medicine. She cleaned the wounds, applied an ointment of herbs to them, and bandaged them with clean rags. Silas, despite the pain, finally calmed down and fell asleep. "What happened, Adelia?" Martha asked, her gaze fixed on Adelia's face. Adelia told her everything, about the cellar, about her mother's letter, about the cursed gold, about Silas, about Elias's madness, about the fight at the mine. She spoke calmly, without emotion, as if telling someone else's story, but deep, inexpressible pain was visible in her eyes. Martha listened to her attentively, her face impassive. When Adelia finished, she just nodded briefly. "I see, child. You did what you had to do. He was a monster. And you saved your brother." There was no judgment in her words, only acceptance and support. This was a liberation for Adelia, a relief. A few hours later, John Hawk entered the boarding house. His face, usually calm, was distorted with anxiety. He had returned from his travels, and seeing the smoke from the burning ranch, he hurried back. His gaze, sharp and perceptive, swept over Martha, then over the sleeping Silas, and then stopped on Adelia. He saw her fatigue, her pain, but at the same time, a new resolve in her eyes. "What happened?" he asked, his voice low. Adelia told him everything again. John Hawk listened to her attentively, his face impassive. When she finished, he just nodded briefly. "I see." There was no surprise in his words. He seemed to have always known that Elias was capable of such a thing. He had long suspected that something was wrong with the ranch. The next few weeks were difficult. Silas slowly recovered. His body was weak, and his psyche was shattered. He often woke up from nightmares, screaming and trembling. Adelia spent all her time with him. She sat next to him, holding his hand, telling him stories about the world he had never seen, about his mother, Bethany, about John Hawk. She was his only support, his guide to a new life. In her eyes, full of tenderness, he found solace. He slowly began to trust her. John Hawk also helped. He brought herbs for Silas, taught him to breathe, soothed him when he woke up from nightmares. He became not just a friend to them both, but a mentor, a man who helped them heal from the wounds of the past. Martha, in turn, took care of them as if they were her own children. Her boarding house became a home for them. Adelia, thanks to the money from the sale of Elias's jewels and the gold bars she had found in the chest, was able to buy a small plot of land on the outskirts of Fort Wells. There they decided to build their own home, a house that would not be a prison, a house that would be a symbol of their new, free life. The gold that had been a curse for Elias became a blessing for them. They used it to create something good, something bright. They began to build the house together. Adelia, Silas, and John Hawk. Every day they worked from dawn to dusk. Their hands were covered with calluses, and their bodies ached from fatigue. But a new hope burned in their hearts. Silas, although weak, gradually came back to life. The work, the fresh air, the care of Adelia and John, all of it helped him heal. He began to smile. His eyes, once full of fear, now shone with gratitude and tenderness. One day, as they sat by the fire, looking at the house being built, Silas turned to Adelia. "Thank you, Adelia," he whispered, his voice still weak, but with sincere gratitude. You saved me. You gave me a new life." Adelia smiled. "We saved each other, Silas, and we'll build a new life together, without fear, without madness, just us." John Hawk, watching them from the shadows, just nodded briefly. He saw that they had found their way, their liberation. In time, their house was built. Small but cozy, with a large garden where Adelia grew flowers and vegetables. Silas found a job in the blacksmith shop. His hands, once weak, became strong and skillful. He became a good craftsman. Adelia opened a small shop where she sold her handicrafts and the books she read. She became a respected woman in the town. Her kindness and wisdom attracted people to her. John Hawk stayed with them. He became a father to them, who was always there, always supportive, always helpful. Their lives were filled with work, laughter, love. They found their peace, their happiness. The cursed gold that had almost destroyed their family became the foundation for their new, bright future. Adelia never forgot about the past, about her mother, about Elias's madness. But now it was not a curse, but a lesson about how important it is to love, how important it is to forgive, how important it is to fight for your freedom. She often sat by the window, looking at the starry sky, her hand gently stroking the burnt amulet. It was a reminder of where she came from and where she was going. She was free, truly free, free from fear, free from hatred, free from the past. And she was happy. Conclusion. This story, set against the harsh backdrop of the American West in the 1880s, delves deeply into themes of healing from trauma, finding family, and discovering meaning in life after destructive trials. Through the story of Adelia and Silas, we see how the pain of loss, cruelty, and madness can cripple a soul, but at the same time, how human resilience, compassion, and the willingness to move forward can lead to rebirth. Adelia, with her inner strength and pursuit of justice, not only saves herself, but also becomes a savior for her brother. Her path is a journey from victim to a strong, independent person who chooses love and creation instead of endless revenge. Silas, in turn, embodies the idea that even after the deepest traumas and loss of faith, one can find healing and a new purpose in life with a loved one by their side. John Hawk serves as a symbol of mentorship and unconditional support, showing that even in the darkest of times, there are those who are willing to lend a helping hand. Lesson. In the modern world, especially for our grandparents, this story holds a profound meaning. It reminds us that life can sometimes be unfair and cruel, and old wounds and unforgiven grievances can hold a person captive for years. However, like Adelia, we can always find the strength within ourselves to break the vicious cycle of pain and suffering. Adelia's story teaches us that the most difficult, yet most important, choice is to choose healing over destruction, to choose forgiveness over eternal hatred. It shows us that even when it seems the world has turned its back on you and the past is impossible to change, there is always an opportunity to create a new future. It is important not to shut yourself off in your pain, but to seek support, find new connections, and not be afraid to trust. True liberation comes not from revenge, but from building a new life free from the shadows of the past, filled with love, care, and meaning. After all, true wealth is not in gold, but in the people around us and in the world we create for ourselves.